I heard the laughter before I saw the faces. My wedding gown felt heavier than the diamond crown on my head, but it was her words that crushed me. "She's just a cashier," my mother-in-law announced to the guests, each syllable slicing into my skin. The room erupted with polite chuckles, cameras flashing as if this humiliation was part of the celebration. What they didn't know was that my bank account could buy this mansion twice over. And what she didn't know was that, by morning, her insult would be trending worldwide, and I would be the one holding the microphone. The chandeliers above me shimmered like captured stars, casting gold light over the marble floors. My veil, a cascade of silk and lace, brushed against my shoulders with every step. People saw romance in it. I saw camouflage. The long fabric wasn't just for tradition. It was my curtain, my shield, the thin line between what they thought I was and what I truly carried. The reception hall pulsed with polite chatter, the string quartet playing an elegant waltz in the corner. My husband stood at my side, smiling in that way a man does when the script of his life is unfolding exactly as planned. Guests in tailored suits and glittering gowns clinked their champagne glasses, congratulating him for marrying so well. Though they didn't mean me, they meant the image I projected. And then, the glass of champagne in my mother-in-law's hand rose like a dagger lifted for ceremony. Her voice, sharp and cold, sliced through the music. "Vivian used to work as a cashier at a grocery store," she announced, her smile polished like the silverware. The air shifted. Some guests gave polite nods. Others exchanged glances. A few chuckled under their breath. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the way she said them, as though she was reading the first line of a tragic joke. I felt my husband's fingers twitch in mine, but he didn't say a word. I forced a smile, tilting my head as though the remark had rolled off me like rain. But my heartbeat didn't match the calm expression. I'd been humiliated before, but never in front of 100 pairs of eyes and a $1,000 photographer. From somewhere near the dessert table, a phone was held just high enough to catch her words. The soft click of a button, a faint red glow from the camera app. It was live streaming. I caught the reflection in a silver tray, the screen already filling with comments. The internet, like fire, spreads best when fed cruelty. As the speeches ended and the music swelled again, I excused myself. The veil trailed behind me like a comet's tail as I stepped onto the balcony. From here, I could hear laughter from inside, a muffled chorus that told me my absence was no tragedy to them. I leaned on the railing, watching the city lights blink far beyond the estate walls. Somewhere in that maze of streets, people were already replaying my mother-in-law's words. Some would laugh, some would share it, and some would start asking who the woman under the veil really was. Because while they thought Cashier was the whole story, they had no idea about the other chapters. They didn't know about the sleepless nights spent in a cramped apartment, building code that would later become the foundation for a multi-million-dollar AI company. They didn't know about the holding companies in Luxembourg and Singapore, the patents filed under names that weren't mine. And they certainly didn't know that the very estate we stood in was leveraged against a loan quietly backed by my own capital. Inside, a murmur rose. Someone must have shown someone else the clip. I pictured the glow of phones lighting up like candles in the dark, strangers choosing sides without knowing the battlefield. On TikTok, the split screen was already happening. One half my mother-in-law smirking, the other half captions in bold white text. "She's just a cashier," with music mocking or defending me. By the time I returned to the table, I could feel the shift. My husband's cousin avoided my eyes. A bridesmaid scrolled her phone under the tablecloth. The air wasn't thick with champagne anymore. It was thick with curiosity. I sat down, letting the veil cover my expression. In the candlelight, it looked romantic, but in my mind, I was already moving pieces on a board only I could see. The internet was fickle, but it was also hungry, and when you knew how to feed it, it could become your greatest weapon. My phone, hidden in the folds of my gown, vibrated. A message from an unknown number appeared. "Thought you'd want to see this." A link followed. I tapped it, and there it was. A tweet from an anonymous account featuring a photo of me laughing with Elon Musk at a tech conference 3 years ago. No caption, just the image. The retweets were climbing fast. Underneath, the comments were split. "She married into money because she's broke." Wait, isn't she that AI startup founder? This girl's hiding something. I slipped the phone away, my pulse steady now. The veil had done its job. They still couldn't see my face, but they were beginning to look. And soon, when they found what I wanted them to find, the same mouths that laughed would be the ones gasping for air. The morning after the wedding, the mansion was unnervingly quiet. Servants moved about softly, carrying trays of breakfast to guests who were still lingering. I stayed in the room assigned to me, a corner suite with high ceilings and windows that overlooked the fog-draped gardens. My veil hung on a chair, limp and ordinary now, its power reduced to mere fabric. I didn't leave the room, didn't touch the breakfast, didn't answer the soft knock on the door from my husband. Silence was my armor. Let them believe I was crushed. Let them think their words had driven me into a sulking retreat. It was a performance, and they were my unwitting audience. Online, however, the performance was very different. The clip from the reception had amassed millions of views overnight. The comments were a war zone, half mocking, half defending me. The defending half was the one I cared about. That was the army I would feed. I pulled out my laptop from the suitcase I'd packed with more care than my wedding gown. In a hidden folder, I opened the files that would serve as my ammunition. Bank statements, contracts, stock certificates, proof of the life they thought didn't exist. They didn't know that years before meeting my husband, I had built and sold a data security company for a figure that still made some VCs jealous. The money had been hidden in a web of shell companies, inaccessible to anyone but me. My phone buzzed. An email from a senior editor at the Financial Gazette. "We'd like to feature you in a profile piece, The Insulted Bride. Interested?" I read it twice. The title was bait, but the platform was powerful. A well-timed interview could reshape the narrative entirely. I didn't reply right away. Timing mattered more than truth. By noon, I decided to leave my room. In the dining hall, conversations dimmed as I entered. I wore a simple ivory blouse and jeans, no makeup, no jewelry. Vulnerability was my costume now. I offered small smiles, the kind you give when you're trying to hide a bruise. In the far corner, my mother-in-law watched me with satisfaction. She thought she'd set the tone of my place in this family. She had no idea I was already rearranging the board. That evening, I slipped away from the estate under the guise of needing space. My driver took me to an address no one in the family knew, an understated skyscraper in the city's financial district. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent except for the faint hum of machinery. The man waiting in the office was impeccably dressed, his silver hair swept back with precision. He rose as I entered. "Vivian," he greeted warmly. "It's been a long time." He was the CEO of Stratagem Tech, the direct competitor to my husband's family's company, and I owned 12% of his shares through an investment trust. We sat across from each other, the skyline sprawling behind us. "They've underestimated you," he said, pouring us both a drink. "They always do," I replied. We discussed market movements, pending contracts, and how a subtle shift in supply chains could cripple my in-laws' next big product launch. It wouldn't be a direct attack. It would be an invisible pressure, one they couldn't trace back to me. A borrowed knife, as the saying went. The only catch was my husband. He was the sole person in that family who had never raised his voice at me, never treated me like a trophy. If this plan worked, it would hurt him too. I told myself he was collateral damage in a necessary war, but the thought didn't sit easily. 2 days later, the blow came from an unexpected direction. My encrypted email pinged with a message forwarded by an anonymous account. It was an internal memo from my father-in-law to the board of directors. Vivian Carter will not be included in any discussions or decisions regarding family trust allocations. All voting rights to be reassigned. The memo had been sent at 8:14 a.m. on the morning after my wedding. Before the cake had even been cleared, they had moved to cut me out entirely. I sat back, the city lights blurring through the glass windows. The storm had been gathering silently, but now it was here, and I would make sure I was the one who controlled where it landed. The email with the family trust memo was still open on my laptop when the next blow landed. It wasn't from my in-laws this time. It was from the internet. A trending hashtag caught my eye. Cashier bride exposed. The posts were slick, coordinated, seeded across multiple platforms at the same time. A single voice couldn't have done this. I dug into the accounts pushing the narrative and found one name that kept appearing. Serena Carter, my sister-in-law. She had 1 million followers on Instagram, a curated life of luxury and aspiration. But the most recent posts weren't about her travels or designer clothes. They were about me. Cropped screenshots from my past, exaggerated captions, side-by-side comparisons of me at a grocery store checkout, and me in my wedding gown. Serena was smart enough not to post the worst attacks herself. Instead, she'd like them, add subtle comments, or share them in stories where they would disappear after 24 hours, but linger in the minds of thousands. I called in a favor from a friend in digital forensics. Within hours, the trail pointed to a payment from an offshore account. The sender? A conglomerate based in Singapore. I knew the name instantly. They had tried to buy my first company years ago, and I'd refused. The realization hit like ice in my veins. This wasn't just personal spite. It was a professional vendetta wearing the mask of family drama. The next morning, my phone buzzed again. A gossip journalist I'd never spoken to before sent me a heads-up message. Photos from your wedding have been sold. You might want to brace yourself. By noon, the tabloids had them. Intimate, high-resolution shots from the ceremony, including one where my veil was lifted, my eyes fixed on my mother-in-law with the faintest smile. The captions twisted the image into something cold, calculating. Bride with a plan, one headline read, as if ambition were a crime. But the story started to shift in ways I hadn't predicted. A French business magazine picked up the clip of my mother-in-law's toast. They ran it with subtitles, framing it as an example of elitism and outdated class prejudice. International readers began to side with me, not her. The battlefield was changing. Still, the Singapore conglomerate didn't stop. When I traced their moves more closely, I found the true puppeteer, Adrian Locke, my former mentor. Years ago, he'd been the first to invest in my fledgling AI startup. But when I refused to sell to his connections, he'd turned cold. I hadn't seen him in nearly a decade, but his style was unmistakable. Indirect strikes, letting others take the public blame. While the media swirled with conflicting narratives, the damage bled into my work. Investors called emergency meetings. Contracts were postponed for review. My inbox filled with legal notices demanding clarification about alleged undisclosed financial liabilities. It was exactly the sort of doubt Adrian thrived on creating, poisoning the air just enough to make people hold their breath before working with you. And then came the worst of it. Late one night, as I sat in the darkened study of the mansion, a new alert popped up. An anonymous account had posted a PDF labeled simply "Marriage Agreement." I clicked it open, my hands cold. It was a contract, detailed, legal, signed, stating that my marriage to my husband was conditional on certain financial arrangements, that I would receive significant assets if we remained married for 5 years. It read like the very definition of a marriage for money. The signature at the bottom was mine, my real signature. I stared at it, trying to piece together when and how it could have been created. My husband's name was there too, alongside a date that didn't match any document I'd ever signed. It was a fabrication, but one done with such precision it could survive a casual audit. The comments beneath the post were savage. She played the long game. Guess the cashier knew what she was doing. This is why rich families need prenups. I closed the laptop and sat back, the weight of it all pressing against my chest. The glass dagger had been drawn, sharp and clear, its edge aimed right at the thin line between my personal life and my empire. And if I didn't move carefully, the next cut would be fatal. The scandal had reached a fever pitch when I decided to set my plan in motion. For days, I had been silent, absorbing the blows, letting the false contract and media noise reach their peak. I knew that timing wasn't just important, it was everything. The annual Global Tech and Finance Summit was the perfect stage. The invitation had been sent months ago, and my in-laws' company was one of the main sponsors. They expected a show of family unity, a chance to parade their influence. What they didn't expect was that I would be the one stepping into the spotlight. When I took the stage, I could feel hundreds of eyes narrowing in confusion. The large screen behind me lit up with a single slide. Ownership structure. Stratagem Tech. Gasps rippled through the crowd as my name appeared at the top. Primary shareholder. I spoke clearly, my voice steady. For the past 3 years, I have been the principal investor in Stratagem Tech, a company that now controls over 30% of the market share in the sector my in-laws' firm depends on. I let the words settle, the reality hitting each listener at their own pace. The recent attacks against me were financed by competitors. The irony, those competitors are partly mine. The CEO of Stratagem stepped onto the stage to join me. He wasn't just a business ally. He had once been my classmate in graduate school, a man whose startup I had quietly rescued from collapse years ago. He shook my hand in front of everyone, sealing the alliance publicly. We unveiled the joint launch of a revolutionary AI system designed to disrupt data logistics, a system that would render several of my in-laws' pending projects obsolete. The presentation was surgical, each demo and statistic a blade slicing through their future revenue streams. I didn't look at my mother-in-law during the applause, but I felt her glare like a shadow pressing against my skin. What I did notice was my husband. He rose from his seat in the front row, his face unreadable, and fixed his eyes on me. There was no anger there, but no pride either. Just a look that made the noise of the room fade into something dangerously quiet. In the days that followed, the dominoes fell exactly as I had predicted. Contracts evaporated. Partners withdrew their commitments, citing strategic realignments. The stock price of my in-laws' company slid like a ship taking on water. Internally, chaos reigned. Executives blamed each other, the board questioned leadership, and the press painted them as vulnerable for the first time in decades. That was when I chose to make my second move. A scheduled press conference at the mansion drew both business journalists and society columnists. I stood on the grand staircase, the same one I had descended in my wedding gown, and told them the truth. I was the legal owner of the property. The Carter estate, I said, was purchased through a holding company 3 years ago. That holding company is mine. Cameras flashed as the reporters processed the implication. Every public event my in-laws had hosted here, every symbol of their heritage, had been conducted on ground they didn't own. Victory tasted like the finest champagne, but it carried a bitter aftertaste. Each step I took toward dismantling their power seemed to chip away at something I had once cherished. My marriage wasn't just under strain, it was unraveling thread by thread. That night, the house was silent again, but not with the tense anticipation of a brewing fight. It was the silence of something ending. I found the bedroom door open, the wardrobe half empty. On the nightstand, beside the lamp, lay my wedding ring, his wedding ring, resting on a folded note I didn't open. The victory I had imagined for so long had arrived. And yet, standing in the center of that hollow, echoing room, I felt only the cold truth. I had burned the bridge that connected me to the only person in that family who had never treated me like an enemy. The win should have felt sweeter. The stock collapse. The public humiliation of my in-laws, the headlines painting me as the strategist who dismantled a dynasty. It was the kind of ending I had imagined in my darkest nights. Yet when the noise of the press conferences faded and the congratulatory messages stopped pouring in, all I could feel was the echo of my husband's absence. I buried myself in work, but it was no longer the same. The fire that had once been fueled by vision and creation was now sustained by something darker: revenge. Every meeting, every deal, every late-night call revolved around keeping the upper hand, anticipating threats before they appeared. My empire was growing, but my joy was shrinking. The press had noticed the change. The Financial Gazette ran a feature titled "The Ice Queen of AI," a profile that once might have thrilled me, but now felt like a verdict. They wrote about my chilling efficiency, my unsentimental approach, my surgical dismantling of competitors. I recognized myself in their words, and I hated it. Then came the collateral damage. Daniel, my longest-serving aide, was called into court over a lawsuit tied to one of the shell companies I'd used years ago. He had no knowledge of the details, but the stress broke him. One morning, he simply didn't show up. His resignation letter was short. No accusations, no explanations, just a clean break. It hit me harder than I expected. In my quest to protect my own position, I had dragged others into my storm. I was still thinking about Daniel when the envelope arrived. No return address, just my name written in a hand I didn't recognize. Inside was a single photograph. It was me, 19 years old, in the grocery store uniform I had worn during my cashier days. But I wasn't alone. Standing beside me was a man I didn't recognize. Tall, well-dressed, even in the grainy print, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. The back of the photo was blank. No date, no message. But there was something in the man's eyes, even blurred by age and poor resolution, that stirred an unease I couldn't place. The answer came sooner than I expected. 2 days later, in a penthouse suite overlooking the harbor, I sat across from him in the flesh. He was older now, his hair silver, his suit immaculate. His voice was calm, as though we had known each other for years. "I'm your father, Vivian," he said, the words landing with the weight of a confession. I didn't respond. My silence must have amused him because he continued. "I've been watching you, every move, every victory. And yes, every mistake. I was the one who financed the attacks against you." I kept my eyes on him, not giving him the satisfaction of shock. "It wasn't to destroy you," he went on. "It was to test you, to see if you were ready." "Ready for what?" My voice was low, measured. "To take your place in the empire I've built. I'm chairman of Orion Capital, the very network that your in-laws feared most. With you by my side, we could control more than you've ever imagined." I thought of the years I'd spent clawing my way up without him, of the nights I'd gone to bed hungry, of the sacrifices I'd made to stand on my own. And now, here he was, claiming to have orchestrated the worst months of my life as some kind of twisted audition. "You paid my mother-in-law to humiliate me," I said, the truth clicking into place. "She was eager to play her part," he replied without remorse. "Everyone has a price." I rose from my chair, needing distance. "And what if my price is to burn everything you've built?" He smiled, not with warmth, but with the confidence of someone who believes they've already won. "Then you'll destroy yourself too, because whether you like it or not, our fortunes are intertwined." The view from the window showed the city in all its glittering sprawl, a tempting prize that could be mine, or his, depending on the choice I made. His final words followed me out the door. "You have 1 week, Vivian. Join me, or watch your crown crumble." The week my father gave me passed in a blur of phone calls, offers, and veiled threats. His people reached out with portfolios of companies I could control, governments I could influence, fortunes I could shape. All I had to do was say yes, But every glossy file he sent, every zero on every check, was a chain disguised as a gift. I saw it clearly now. The same game my in-laws played, the same rules that turned loyalty into currency and love into leverage. I had survived them both, and I wasn't about to step into another gilded cage. On the morning of the 7th day, I made my move. I called my lawyers, instructed them to sell every share I owned, Stratagem Tech, the shell companies, even the estate. I liquidated it all. The markets reeled. Commentators called it reckless, a spectacular implosion of one of the most formidable portfolios in the industry. But the freedom in my chest was worth more than their panic. With the funds secured in a trust beyond my father's reach, I issued my final public statement as CEO. I will not play by rules designed to break others. The game ends here. There were no goodbyes to the board, no parting speeches. My exit was swift, decisive, and absolute. The first few days away from the spotlight were disorienting. I woke without alarms, without an inbox screaming for my attention. I walked city streets without bodyguards. I cooked my own breakfast for the first time in years. It was mundane, yet it felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I'd forgotten existed. Then came the article. It appeared on an independent news site, written under a pseudonym. The headline read, "The Woman Who Left the Throne to Live." It described my rise, my battles, my victories, and my decision to walk away. The tone was reverent but human, painting me not as a queen or a villain, but as a woman who chose herself over power. I never learned who wrote it, but I recognized the undercurrent. It wasn't about business. It was about breaking a cycle. While the media speculated on my disappearance, I began quietly building something new. Not a company, not an empire. At least, not in the traditional sense. I set up a fund dedicated to supporting women entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds, those who had the vision but not the network, the grit but not the capital. I made the rules. No publicity, no interviews, no events. The recipients wouldn't even know the money came from me. The work was different from anything I'd done before. There were no quarterly reports to impress investors, no rival CEOs to outmaneuver. It was slower, quieter, and somehow more satisfying. Each success story was a reminder that change didn't have to be loud to be real. Months passed. The world moved on to new scandals, new moguls, new gossip. My name faded from the front pages, replaced by fresher targets. I became just another face in the crowd, and for the first time, I liked it that way. One rainy afternoon, I found myself in a small cafe tucked into a side street, a place with mismatched chairs and the smell of cinnamon in the air. I was reading, my hair tied back, a simple sweater instead of designer silk. The barista brought me coffee without recognizing me. I smiled, thanked her, and went back to my book. I didn't notice the camera at first. Someone across the room had taken a picture, me laughing at something in the book, sunlight breaking through the window and catching the steam from my cup. The photo went viral overnight, but this time the narrative was different. No captions mocking my past, no speculation about my bank account, just 1,000 variations of the same sentiment. She looks happy. It felt like a different kind of crown, one I hadn't fought for, one no one could take away. Weeks later, a single line appeared beneath a repost of the photo on a private forum for women entrepreneurs. One day, she'll return. I didn't comment, didn't confirm or deny. Maybe it was true. Maybe one day I would step back into the arena, this time on my own terms. Or maybe I'd stay right where I was, sipping coffee in quiet corners, building change from the shadows. For now, it was enough to know that I could choose. And in that choice, I had already won.